Qui me servent de grand-mère que j'ai adoptées parce que je les aime. Et si on me...
At 91, the passing of Brigitte Bardot did not shock the world. Instead, it forced it to pause. For many, Bardot had already vanished decades ago. She was one of the most famous women of the 20th century, a face that redefined beauty, freedom, and rebellion, yet she chose to walk away from fame while the world was still chasing her. No comeback, no nostalgia tour, no return to the spotlight. Her death is not just the end of a life, but the closing of a rare chapter in cultural history. Bardot was not simply a movie star. She was a turning point in cinema, in fashion, and in how women were seen on screen. But her most radical act came after success, when she rejected everything fame offered. To understand why Brigitte Bardot still matters today, we must look not at how she rose, but why she chose to disappear. To understand why Brigitte Bardot became far more than a movie star, you have to begin with what she was not. She was not trained to seek attention. She was not raised to crave applause. And she was never taught how to survive fame. Born in Paris in 1934, Bardot grew up in a strict, disciplined household where obedience mattered more than self-expression. As a child, she was trained in classical ballet, a world defined by control, precision, and restraint. That early education shaped her body, but it also shaped her discomfort with excess attention later in life. When Bardot entered cinema in the early 1950 seconds, she did not fit the traditional mold of French actresses of the time. She lacked theatrical polish. Her performances felt instinctive rather than constructed. And that difference, initially seen as a weakness, quickly became her defining strength. Audiences sensed something raw and unfiltered about her presence. She didn't appear to be performing femininity, she embodied it naturally, without apology or explanation. Everything changed in 1956 with And God Created Woman. The film did more than launch Bardot's career. It disrupted cultural expectations. Her character was sensual, independent, and unconcerned with moral approval. At a time when female sexuality on screen was tightly controlled and coded, Bardot appeared effortless and free. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Critics argued, moralists protested. Audiences couldn't look away. Bardot became a symbol almost overnight, not because she asked to be, but because society needed one. What followed was unprecedented. Bardot's image spread beyond cinema into every corner of popular culture. Her hairstyle, her clothing, her posture all became references. Designers studied her. Photographers chased her. Magazines across Europe and the United States placed her face on their covers. She represented a new kind of woman, confident without arrogance, sensual without permission, rebellious without speeches. Yet even at the height of her rise, Bardot never seemed fully comfortable with the role assigned to her. Throughout the late 1950 seconds and 1960 seconds, she appeared in more than 50 films, including The Truth, Contempt, and Viva Maria. These performances showed a range many critics initially underestimated. She could convey vulnerability without sentimentality, silence without emptiness, emotional distance without coldness. Directors often remarked that Bardot didn't act in a conventional sense. She reacted, she existed, and that presence gave her films an immediacy that felt modern long before cinema fully embraced realism. Still, fame came at a cost. Bardot's celebrity was relentless. She was followed constantly by photographers. Her private life became public property. Every relationship, every decision, every moment of solitude was scrutinized. Unlike stars who learned to manipulate publicity, Bardot experienced it as intrusion. In interviews, she later described feeling hunted, misunderstood, and trapped by an image she did not control. This tension between who she was and what the world demanded grew more intense as her fame expanded. Bardot became a paradox, a symbol of freedom who felt increasingly confined. By the early 1970 seconds, she stood at a crossroads few celebrities ever reach. She was still young, still globally recognized, still capable of leading major productions. Yet instead of transitioning into new roles or reinventing herself on screen, Bardot made a decision that stunned the entertainment industry. She walked away. No farewell film, no gradual retreat. She retired from acting entirely. This was not burnout. It was rejection. Bardot chose absence over visibility. Control over consumption. In an industry built on perpetual relevance, her decision was radical. She refused to become a nostalgia act or a product reshaped by age. By leaving early, she preserved her image, but more importantly, she reclaimed her autonomy. What many misunderstood at the time was that Bardot wasn't abandoning purpose. She was redirecting it. Animal welfare had long been a private concern for her, but after leaving cinema, it became central to her life. She committed herself fully, founding what would become one of France's most influential animal rights organizations. This was not symbolic activism. Bardot invested her time, money, and reputation into the cause. She spoke with intensity, often without compromise, and sometimes at the cost of public approval. In this second chapter of her life, Bardot transformed yet again from global sex symbol to moral advocate. For many, this shift was difficult to reconcile. The woman once celebrated for beauty now demanded ethical responsibility. The contrast unsettled the public, but it reflected a consistency in Bardot's character. She had always resisted being defined by expectation. As the decades passed, Bardot retreated further from public life. Interviews became rare, appearances nearly non-existent. She lived quietly, focused on her foundation and her animals, far from the glamour that once defined her. And in doing so, she achieved something few icons ever manage. She controlled her disappearance. While others struggled with fading relevance, Bardot allowed silence to protect her legacy. Her image remained frozen in time, youthful, defiant, iconic, while her real life unfolded away from the camera's gaze. This deliberate withdrawal added to her mystique. She became not just a figure of the past, but a reference point, a reminder that fame does not have to be permanent to be powerful. By choosing when to leave, Brigitte Bardot redefined what success could look like. Not accumulation, not longevity, but alignment between values and action. And that choice would come to define her far more than any role she ever played. As Brigitte Bardot withdrew from cinema, the world slowly realized something unusual was happening. Unlike most stars who fade quietly after retirement, Bardot did not disappear into irrelevance. She transformed into something far less comfortable, a public figure who no longer cared whether she was liked. Her commitment to animal welfare was absolute. Through the foundation she established, Bardot became one of the most visible and uncompromising advocates for animal rights in France. She spoke out against industrial farming, animal testing, seal hunting, and the use of animals in entertainment. Her language was often emotional, sometimes harsh, and deliberately confrontational. Bardot was not interested in polite persuasion. She wanted shock, urgency, and change. That approach brought results. Her foundation influenced public debate, supported legislative efforts, and forced uncomfortable conversations into the mainstream. But it also brought controversy. Bardot's public statements, especially later in life, were often criticized as extreme or divisive. Many who once admired her beauty and screen presence struggled to reconcile that image with the outspoken activist she had become. Bardot did not attempt to soften her tone. In interviews, she made it clear that she no longer felt responsible for maintaining a public image. Fame, in her view, had already taken enough from her. She had no interest in being carefully misunderstood again. This refusal to conform, first in cinema, later in activism, became one of the most consistent threads of her life. Whether admired or condemned, Bardot remained unmoved by public reaction. What makes this phase of her life particularly striking is how completely it eclipsed her film career for those who encountered her later. To younger generations in France, Bardot was not primarily remembered as an actress. She was known as an activist, a recluse, a woman who lived surrounded by animals, far from the glamour she once embodied. That reversal of legacy is rare. Most icons fight to preserve their past. Bardot allowed hers to be overwritten by conviction. At the same time, her withdrawal from public appearances deepened her mystique. She granted few interviews. She avoided ceremonies, tributes, and retrospectives. Unlike peers who returned repeatedly to relive their glory, Bardot stayed away. Her absence became part of the story. She existed as a frozen image, eternally young in photographs, while the real woman aged privately on her own terms. This deliberate separation between image and reality protected her legacy in an unexpected way. Bardot was never forced to compete with her former self. She was never asked to relive old roles or explain her relevance. By stepping aside early, she preserved the intensity of her cultural impact. Her films remained untouched by overexposure, rediscovered rather than recycled. When news of her death emerged at the age of 91, the reaction reflected this long distance she had maintained. There was no frenzy, no shock. Instead, there was reflection. Tributes focused less on individual films and more on the choices she made. The emphasis was not on what she achieved, but on what she walked away from. In an industry built on constant visibility, Bardot's absence became her final statement. Her death marked the closing of one of the last direct links to post-war European cinema, a period when film stars shaped culture in ways that extended far beyond entertainment. Bardot was part of a generation that did not merely reflect social change, it accelerated it. Her presence on screen altered how femininity, desire, and autonomy were portrayed. Her decision to leave altered how success itself could be understood. Today, her influence persists in subtle but powerful ways. Filmmakers still reference her naturalism. Fashion continues to recycle her look. Cultural discussions around fame, privacy, and agency often circle back to her example. Bardot's life offers a counter-narrative to modern celebrity culture, where relevance is measured by constant exposure and personal boundaries are routinely erased. She demonstrated that stepping away can be an act of strength rather than failure. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of Bardot's legacy is the question her life raises. What does it mean to live authentically when the world insists on turning you into an image? How much of oneself must be sacrificed to remain visible? Bardot answered these questions not with words, but with action. She chose conviction over comfort, silence over spectacle, purpose over applause. In doing so, she redefined what it means to leave a mark. Brigitte Bardot did not fade, she concluded, and by choosing when and how to disappear, she ensured that her legacy would not be dictated by age, nostalgia, or decline, but by intention. That decision, more than beauty, fame, or controversy, is what continues to make her impossible to forget. In the end, the legacy of Brigitte Bardot cannot be measured by box office numbers, awards, or even cultural impact alone. It is measured by a decision few icons ever dare to make the decision to leave. Bardot reached the highest levels of fame the modern world could offer, then turned her back on it without hesitation. She refused to let her identity be consumed by nostalgia, publicity, or the slow erosion of relevance. Instead, she chose conviction. She chose silence. She chose a life guided by values rather than applause. In a world that demands constant visibility, Bardot proved that absence can be powerful, that walking away can preserve dignity, that success does not have to mean staying in the spotlight forever. Her story invites a quiet but uncomfortable question for all of us. If you had everything the world promised, would you have the courage to give it up and live on your own terms? Now we'd like to hear from you. Do you believe Brigitte Bardot made the right choice by leaving fame behind? Or do you think the world lost too much when she disappeared? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you value deep stories behind legendary lives, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay with us, because some legacies are built not by staying, but by knowing when to leave.